Melissa Harrington had always prided herself on her impeccable instincts, whether managing her career as a boutique hotel owner or keeping her marriage to Robert afloat. At 48, she was sharp, stunning, and fiercely independent, a woman who turned heads even after 2 decades of marriage. Her life seemed picture-perfect, a beautiful home, a thriving business, and a partnership that others envied. But lately, she had felt the shift. Robert, 52, had grown distant. The man who once sent her flowers for no reason now came home late, his excuses hollow and repetitive. Business meetings that ran long, traffic jams, colleagues in crisis. Melissa knew the rhythm of lies too well, though she hoped she was wrong. One Thursday evening, she sat in their immaculate kitchen, her fingers lightly drumming on the marble countertop. Robert's seat at the dining table remained empty, a half-eaten plate of dinner in front of her. She glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. Her phone buzzed, a single message lighting up the screen. Running late. Don't wait up. Meetings dragged on. Melissa's lips tightened. Meetings. Always the meetings. She poured herself another glass of wine, the rich red liquid swirling in the glass like the storm brewing inside her. Memories of their early years together flashed through her mind. The passion, the laughter, the way Robert used to look at her as if she were the only person in the world. Now, his gaze seemed distant, as though his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The next morning, Melissa decided to push aside her doubts and focus on the hotel. Work was her sanctuary, a place where she felt in control. The staff greeted her warmly as she walked through the elegant lobby, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Morning, Mrs. Harrington," her assistant, Paige, said, falling into step beside her. "The vendor meeting is at 10, and the decorator for the upcoming gala is in conference room B." Melissa nodded, scanning her schedule. "Perfect. I'll start with the decorator." Work flowed smoothly, and for a few hours, she managed to forget her unease. It wasn't until lunch that the creeping suspicion returned. She overheard a couple at the hotel restaurant discussing infidelity, a wife catching her husband at a restaurant with another woman. The words struck her like a physical blow, and she couldn't stop the question from surfacing in her mind. What if I'm right? What if Robert is cheating? Later that evening, as Robert showered, Melissa noticed his phone lying on the bedside table. Her heart pounded as she stared at it. She hated the idea of snooping. It felt beneath her, but her instincts wouldn't let her ignore the nagging doubts. The lock screen glowed as she picked it up. A message preview caught her eye. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. Same place." The sender was labeled as "Work, Jenny." Melissa's breath caught. Jenny wasn't a name she recognized, and the tone of the message wasn't professional. Her stomach churned as she placed the phone back, her hands trembling. When Robert emerged from the bathroom, his towel slung low on his hips, Melissa forced a smile. "How was work today?" "Same old grind," he replied, running a hand through his damp hair. "Exhausting." She studied him carefully, noting the subtle tension in his posture. "Anything interesting happen?" He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "Not really. Just meetings." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that it made Melissa's blood boil. She excused herself, retreating to her home office to collect her thoughts. The following days were a blur of doubt and mounting anxiety. Melissa found herself walking the fine line between denial and the need to uncover the truth. She considered hiring a private investigator but dismissed the idea. It felt too dramatic, too final. Instead, she devised a plan. On Friday evening, as Robert prepared to leave for another supposed work dinner, Melissa smiled sweetly. "I'm meeting Paige for drinks tonight, so don't wait up." He seemed relieved, almost too eager to agree. "Sounds great. Have fun." Melissa waited until his car disappeared down the driveway before grabbing her keys and following at a distance. Robert drove to a downtown bistro Melissa didn't recognize, a cozy, dimly lit spot with intimate booths. From her car, parked discreetly across the street, she watched as he entered the restaurant. A few minutes later, a tall blonde woman arrived, her laughter carrying faintly through the cool evening air as Robert greeted her with a warm embrace. Melissa's breath hitched. The pair sat together at a corner booth, their heads leaning close as they talked. Melissa's heart sank as she saw Robert's hand casually rest on the woman's. She snapped a photo with her phone, her fingers trembling. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't the proof she needed to confront him. Not yet. Melissa drove home in silence, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to end quietly. Melissa sat on the edge of her bed, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. The photo of Robert and the blonde woman stared back at her from her phone screen, a cruel validation of her fears. She had suspected it for months, but seeing it, cold, undeniable, felt like a punch to the gut. Her first instinct was to confront him immediately, to demand answers. But something stopped her. This wasn't just a betrayal of their vows. It was a breach of the life they had built together. She needed more than his lies and excuses. She needed the full truth. The next morning, Robert was uncharacteristically cheerful. He whistled as he poured his coffee, kissed Melissa's cheek without hesitation, and mentioned weekend plans as if nothing had changed. Melissa played along, her smile tight as she buttered her toast. "You seem in a good mood," she said, keeping her tone light. "Just glad it's Friday," Robert replied. "I thought we could do something together tomorrow. Maybe a hike? Get some fresh air." "That sounds nice," Melissa said, her voice steady despite the turmoil roiling inside her. But her mind was elsewhere, plotting her next move. Later that day, Melissa enlisted the help of Paige, her trusted assistant. "I need you to help me with something delicate," Melissa began, closing the office door behind her. Paige's brows furrowed. "Of course. What's going on?" Melissa hesitated before showing her the photo. "I think Robert is cheating. I followed him last night." Paige's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Melissa. I'm so sorry." Melissa nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I need you to help me find out more. Who is this woman? How long has this been going on? I need everything." Paige didn't hesitate. "I'll take care of it." By the end of the day, Paige had results. "Her name is Jennifer Russo," Paige said, handing Melissa a folder filled with details. "She works in marketing at Robert's company. Divorced, no kids. It looks like she's been on and off with him for at least 6 months." Melissa's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. There were photos of Jennifer from social media, screenshots of her comments on Robert's posts, and even records of her attending events that Melissa had been conveniently excluded from. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Melissa closed the folder, her jaw tightening. "Thank you, Paige. This confirms everything. What are you going to do?" Paige asked cautiously. Melissa's lips curved into a cold smile. "I'm going to make sure Robert regrets every single decision he's made." That evening, Melissa's plan began to take shape. She didn't want a screaming match or an explosive confrontation. She wanted Robert to feel the weight of his betrayal in the most personal, calculated way possible. She started with their finances. Over the years, Melissa had taken on more control of their assets as her business flourished. Robert had grown comfortable relying on her, letting her handle the accounts and investments while he focused on his career. Melissa logged into their joint accounts and began transferring funds into a private account she had set up years ago. She left enough for him not to notice immediately, but just enough to make sure he wouldn't have easy access when the time came. Next, she went through their shared calendar, noting his upcoming business trips and late-night meetings. She planned to shadow him, documenting his movements until she had everything she needed. Saturday came, and Robert acted as if nothing were wrong. They went on the hike he suggested, strolling along a wooded trail as birds chirped overhead. Melissa kept her cool, nodding and smiling at his small talk, all the while thinking of the woman he had held hands with at the bistro. When they stopped for water, Melissa feigned concern. "You've been working so hard lately. Are you sure everything's okay?" Robert smiled, his tone smooth and rehearsed. "Just the usual work stress, but it's nothing I can't handle." His lies were almost laughable now, but Melissa didn't flinch. "You're amazing, you know," she said softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. He kissed her forehead, the gesture mechanical. So are you. Melissa's surveillance continued over the next week. She caught Robert slipping out of the office at odd hours and tracked him to another rendezvous with Jennifer, this time at a boutique hotel in the city. The sight of him walking into the lobby with her, their bodies brushing as they laughed, sent a pang through Melissa's chest, but the pain was quickly replaced by resolve. She snapped more photos, her hands steady as she documented every damning detail. By the time Robert returned home that night, Melissa was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. She listened as he tiptoed around the room, his movements careful, as if he knew he was walking on borrowed time. The next morning, Melissa received an email from Paige with additional information, Jennifer's address. Melissa stared at the email for a long time, her thoughts swirling. She had all the proof she needed to confront Robert now, but something inside her told her to wait. The moment had to be perfect, and it had to leave no doubt in his mind about the gravity of his betrayal. And she knew exactly how to make it happen. By Friday, Melissa's plan was in full swing. She pretended to leave town for a business trip, even arranging for her assistant to call Robert and confirm the details. He had seemed almost giddy when she mentioned being away for the weekend. "Take it easy while I'm gone," she said sweetly, kissing his cheek before leaving. "You too," Robert replied, the relief in his voice impossible to miss. Melissa drove to a nearby hotel, where she checked in under a false name. From there, she watched the clock, knowing exactly when Robert would act on her absence. When the time came, she drove back to their home, parking a few houses down and slipping inside through the back door. The house was quiet, the familiar scent of their life together mingling with something new, perfume. She crept up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, the faint sound of laughter filtering through. Melissa peeked inside, her stomach twisting at the sight before her. Robert and Jennifer were lying on the bed, their faces close as they whispered and laughed like carefree lovers. Melissa's grip tightened on her phone as she began recording. This wasn't just proof, this was justice. Melissa stood in the shadows of the hallway, her phone capturing every damning second of Robert and Jennifer's betrayal. Her breath was steady, her grip firm. This was the moment she had been preparing for, and she refused to let emotions cloud her judgment. Through the crack in the door, she saw Robert reach for Jennifer, his laughter low and intimate. The sight made her stomach churn, but she focused on the bigger picture. Every word, every stolen touch, and every whispered promise they exchanged was ammunition for what came next. After a few minutes, Melissa backed away from the door, careful not to make a sound. She slipped back downstairs, pausing in the kitchen to collect herself. She wasn't ready for the confrontation yet. Not here, not now. She left the house as quietly as she had entered, her heart pounding as she slid behind the wheel of her car. The anger coursing through her veins was electric, but beneath it was the icy calm of resolve. The following days were a whirlwind of planning. Melissa spent hours meticulously reviewing the recordings, crafting her strategy. She didn't want to simply confront Robert. She wanted to dismantle his world the way he had dismantled her trust. The plan took shape piece by piece, and soon Melissa was ready to strike. Friday evening, Robert arrived home to an empty house. Melissa had texted him earlier, claiming she was at a late business meeting. He didn't seem to question her absence, his response brief and indifferent. Melissa's car was parked a few blocks away. From her hidden vantage point, she watched as Jennifer arrived, her sleek car pulling into the driveway. The blonde emerged, her smile bright and carefree as she made her way to the door. Melissa smirked. Perfect. She waited until the house lights flickered on and shadows danced across the drawn curtains. Then, she grabbed her bag and headed toward the house. Inside, Robert and Jennifer were in the kitchen, laughing over glasses of wine. The sound of their voices grated on Melissa as she slipped through the back door, her movements silent. She positioned herself just out of sight, listening to their conversation. "You're so much happier when she's not around," Jennifer cooed, tracing a finger along Robert's arm. Robert chuckled, his tone smug. "She's so wrapped up in her work, she doesn't even notice half the time. It's exhausting, Jen. You're the only thing keeping me sane." Melissa clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. It was time. She stepped into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the floor. Oh, don't stop on my account. The color drained from Robert's face. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Jennifer froze, her eyes wide with shock. Melissa, Robert stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? Melissa raised her phone, the screen displaying the video she had recorded days earlier. I think the better question is, what are you doing here? Jennifer shot Robert a panicked glance, her cheeks flushing. I should go. Oh, no, Melissa said, her voice dripping with icy calm. You're not going anywhere. This involves you too. Jennifer hesitated, her hand hovering over her purse. Melissa stepped forward, her posture commanding. Sit, she ordered. Jennifer obeyed, sliding into one of the kitchen chairs. Robert remained rooted to the spot, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for an excuse that wouldn't come. Melissa placed her phone on the table, pressing play on the recording. The room filled with the sound of their laughter, their intimate conversation. Robert's face turned ashen as he watched himself on the screen, his betrayal laid bare. This, Melissa said, her voice steady, is what I've been dealing with while you've been sneaking around behind my back. Melissa, I can explain, Robert began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. No, she snapped. You don't get to explain. I've spent months watching you lie to my face, pretending everything was fine. I gave you every chance to come clean, and this is what you chose instead. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Look, I didn't mean to. Spare me, Melissa interrupted, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. You knew he was married. Don't act like you're innocent in this. Jennifer shrank back, her lips pressed into a thin line. Melissa turned her attention back to Robert, her tone softening but losing none of its edge. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? To find out the man I've spent my life with thinks so little of me that he'd throw it all away for this? She gestured toward Jennifer. Robert looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he mumbled. Melissa laughed bitterly. Of course you didn't. Men like you never do. But don't worry, Robert. I'm not here to beg or cry. I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what you've lost. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers, slapping them onto the table. These are the divorce papers. I suggest you sign them before the end of the week. And just so we're clear, I've already moved our joint funds into a private account. You'll be hearing from my lawyer about the settlement. Robert's mouth fell open. Melissa, wait, I'm not finished, she said coldly. She pulled out a second envelope and slid it toward Jennifer. Inside are copies of the video and a letter addressed to HR at your company. I imagine they'll be very interested in how you've been spending your work hours. Jennifer's face went pale. You wouldn't try me, Melissa said, her voice low and dangerous. Jennifer grabbed her purse and bolted for the door, her heels clicking frantically against the floor. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Melissa turned back to Robert, who looked like a man on the verge of collapse. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. Melissa's gaze softened, just for a moment. Because you took me for granted, Robert. You thought I'd never fight back. But you forgot who I am, and now you're going to remember. With that, she grabbed her bag and walked out, leaving Robert alone in the ruins of the life he had destroyed. The days following Melissa's explosive confrontation were filled with chaos, consequences, and the slow unraveling of Robert's carefully constructed facade. Melissa hadn't returned home after that night. Instead, she stayed at a boutique hotel downtown. The irony of staying in one of her own establishments wasn't lost on her. The staff gave her privacy, no doubt noticing the change in her demeanor, but wisely keeping their questions to themselves. In the quiet of her hotel suite, Melissa felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, sadness, and, surprisingly, satisfaction. She had done what many in her position couldn't. She hadn't crumbled. She hadn't begged for an explanation or forgiveness. Instead, she had taken control, and now the pieces of her life were falling into place on her terms. Meanwhile, Robert's life was crumbling. When Melissa's divorce attorney contacted him, he realized just how thoroughly she had outmaneuvered him. The financial accounts he thought were secure were empty, the investments he had made were under her name, and the house, their beautiful home that once symbolized everything they'd built together, was legally hers. Sitting in the lawyer's office, Robert read through the terms of the divorce with growing dread. "You're telling me she gets the house, the majority of our savings, and the business stays untouched?" he asked incredulously. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with glasses perched on the edge of her nose, glanced at him over her paperwork. "Yes, Mr. Harrington, that's what happens when you sign prenuptial agreements favoring your wife, who happens to be significantly more financially successful than you." Robert rubbed his temples. "There has to be something I can do." "You could fight the terms," the lawyer said, her tone flat, "but it's unlikely to go in your favor. Given the evidence your wife has," he groaned, cutting her off. "Melissa's evidence. The recordings, the photos, the paper trail of his affair with Jennifer. She had left nothing to chance. Jennifer, too, felt the aftershocks. The morning after Melissa's confrontation, she had arrived at work, her stomach tied in knots. She tried to convince herself that Melissa wouldn't go through with her threats. But when she opened her office email, her heart sank. There it was, a message forwarded from HR requesting an immediate meeting to discuss her inappropriate conduct with a colleague. Attached to the email were the damning photos and a copy of Melissa's letter. Jennifer sat frozen, her face pale as her co-workers moved around her obliviously. She knew this wasn't just a scandal, it was a career-ending disaster. The meeting with HR was brutal. The company's zero-tolerance policy on workplace relationships, especially those involving dishonesty, left no room for negotiation. By the end of the day, Jennifer was cleaning out her desk. As she carried her box of belongings to her car, her phone buzzed. A message from Robert. "We need to talk." Jennifer stared at the screen, her anger and humiliation bubbling to the surface. She ignored the message, tossing her phone into her bag with a huff. Robert's attempts to contact Jennifer went unanswered for days. When she finally responded, it was with a curt text, "There's nothing to discuss. I'm done." The message left Robert seething. He was furious at Melissa for orchestrating this fallout, at Jennifer for abandoning him, and at himself for being so careless. Melissa, meanwhile, was thriving in her newfound independence. She had thrown herself into her work, focusing on the upcoming gala at her hotel. The event was poised to be the highlight of the season, with high-profile guests, media coverage, and an opportunity to showcase the hotel's prestige. But more than that, the gala was her statement to the world, and to herself, that she wasn't defined by Robert's betrayal. She had risen above it, and she intended to shine. On the night of the gala, Melissa stood before her mirror, adjusting the shimmering emerald gown that hugged her figure. Her stylist had outdone herself, crafting a look that was equal parts elegance and power. As she surveyed her reflection, she felt a spark of pride. This was her moment, a declaration that she had moved on, stronger and more focused than ever. Robert, however, was not ready to let go. He arrived at the gala uninvited, his suit slightly rumpled, his expression tight with desperation. The doorman hesitated before letting him through, recognizing him as Melissa's estranged husband. Inside, Melissa was mingling effortlessly with her guests, her laughter echoing across the grand ballroom. When she spotted Robert near the entrance, her smile faltered for a brief moment before she composed herself. "Robert," she said smoothly, approaching him, "what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Melissa raised an eyebrow. "I don't think we do. Anything you have to say can go through my lawyer." "Please, Melissa," he pressed. "Just 5 minutes." She sighed, glancing around to ensure no one was paying attention. "Fine, 5 minutes. Let's make it quick." She led him to a quieter corner of the ballroom, her posture radiating control. "I've lost everything," Robert said, his voice breaking. "The house, the money. Jennifer left. I don't even have my reputation at work anymore." Melissa's gaze was steely. "And whose fault is that?" "I made mistakes," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. But I don't want to lose you. Can't we find a way to move forward? Melissa stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the weight of his words settle between them. Finally, she spoke, her tone cool but firm. Robert, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices that destroyed our marriage and shattered my trust. You didn't just lose me. You threw me away. He flinched at her words, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know I can't fix this, but I'm asking you for another chance. Please. Melissa's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. I've already given you enough chances, Robert. This time, I'm choosing myself. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the corner of the glittering ballroom, the sounds of laughter and music fading into the background. Melissa returned to the crowd, her confidence unshaken. The past was behind her now, and the future was hers to shape. The weeks following the gala marked the beginning of a new chapter in Melissa Harrington's life. Gone were the shadows of Robert's betrayal, the whispers of scandal, and the emotional weight of years spent questioning her worth. She had emerged from the wreckage with clarity and strength, determined to build a future defined entirely on her terms. Melissa's boutique hotel had never thrived more. The gala had been a resounding success, cementing the venue's reputation as a destination for the city's elite. Bookings surged, and Melissa found herself fielding offers for partnerships and expansions. But the success wasn't just professional. For the first time in years, Melissa allowed herself to focus on her personal happiness. On a crisp Saturday morning, she sat on the patio of a bustling cafe, savoring the first rays of spring sunlight. Across the table sat Lila, her oldest friend and fiercest supporter. You look amazing, Lila said, sipping her latte. It's like you've aged backwards since all that drama with Robert. Melissa chuckled, running a hand through her sleek chestnut hair. Let's just say I've learned how to prioritize myself for once. And how's the whole new chapter thing going? Any exciting developments? Melissa smiled, her green eyes sparkling. Let's just say I'm open to possibilities. Lila leaned closer, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. Well, I may have an idea for one of those possibilities. You remember David? My cousin who works in publishing. Melissa raised an eyebrow. The one who spent half of last year traveling through Europe? Exactly, Lila said. He's back in town, single, and very much your type. You should meet him. Melissa hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. It had been years since she'd even considered the idea of dating. Come on, Lila urged. It's just dinner. No pressure. After a moment, Melissa nodded. All right, why not? A week later, Melissa found herself seated across from David in an intimate Italian restaurant. The flickering candlelight cast warm shadows across his features, sharp jawline, kind eyes, and an easy smile that immediately put her at ease. I have to admit, David said, swirling his glass of wine. When Lila said you owned a boutique hotel, I was expecting something, I don't know, more corporate. Melissa laughed softly. It's anything but corporate. It's personal, a reflection of what I love. Creating spaces where people feel at home. That's impressive, he said, his gaze earnest. And inspiring. It's rare to meet someone so passionate about what they do. Melissa felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. Not as Robert's wife, not as a victim, but as the woman she had worked so hard to become. While Melissa was embracing her new beginnings, Robert's life continued to spiral. He had moved into a modest apartment after losing the house, a stark contrast to the luxurious home he had shared with Melissa. His professional reputation had taken a hit, his colleagues now seeing him as the man who had let personal indiscretions tarnish his image. And Jennifer? She had vanished from his life completely, her termination and public disgrace leaving her bitter and unwilling to associate with him any longer. One evening, as Robert sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, nursing a glass of cheap whiskey, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Melissa. Your copy of the signed divorce papers is ready. I'll leave it at the hotel front desk for you to collect. Best of luck. Her tone was polite, distant, and final. Robert stared at the message, a mix of regret and anger churning in his chest. Melissa's success was plastered across social media. Photos from the gala, glowing reviews of her hotel, and, most recently, a picture of her at the Italian restaurant, smiling with David. He slammed his phone down, the realization hitting him like a brick. Melissa had moved on, completely and irrevocably. For Melissa, the divorce marked the end of one story and the start of another. Her relationship with David blossomed naturally, free of the emotional baggage that had weighed down her marriage. Together, they explored the city, shared stories of their travels, and supported each other's ambitions. One evening, as they strolled along the waterfront, David paused, turning to face her. "You know," he said, his tone soft, "you amaze me. After everything you've been through, you've built something incredible. It's rare to meet someone with that kind of resilience." Melissa smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I've learned that life doesn't end when things fall apart. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of something better." David reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I'm glad I get to be part of that something better." Robert, on the other hand, found himself trapped in the shadows of his own choices. He spent countless nights scrolling through photos of his former life, each image a painful reminder of what he had lost. One day, he returned to Melissa's hotel to collect the divorce papers. The lobby was bustling, the staff polished and professional, and the atmosphere vibrant, a testament to Melissa's success. As he stood at the front desk, waiting for the documents, he spotted Melissa across the room, speaking with a group of guests. She was radiant, her laughter genuine, her confidence magnetic. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Melissa's smile faltered slightly before she turned back to her guests, her expression unreadable. The desk clerk handed Robert the envelope. "Here you go, Mr. Harrington. Have a nice day." Robert nodded mutely, tucking the envelope under his arm as he left the hotel. Outside, the weight of his mistakes pressed down on him, heavier than ever. Melissa watched Robert leave from the corner of her eye, her emotions a mixture of pity and closure. She didn't regret confronting him, or the fallout that followed. It had been painful, but it had also been necessary. As she returned to her guests, Melissa felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The past was behind her, and the future stretched ahead. A blank canvas, waiting to be filled with the colors of her choosing.